The rain poured heavily that night, drenching the winding country road in a slick sheen of water and fallen leaves. Emily Carson gripped the steering wheel of her modest sedan, exhaustion pulling at her like an anchor. After a grueling double shift at the hospital, her body begged for rest, but her mind was still on autopilot, running through the day's chaos of patients, emergencies, and the endless beeping of monitors. As she rounded a sharp curve, her headlights caught something unusual, a gleam of shattered glass scattered across the road. Her heart jolted as she slowed down, her gaze darting to the ditch on the side. There, in the eerie glow of her car's lights, was the wreckage of a luxury vehicle, crumpled against a tree. Without hesitation, Emily pulled over and jumped out, the rain soaking her scrubs almost instantly. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the downpour. Approaching the car cautiously, she saw the driver slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. The man was unconscious but alive, his shallow breasts visible in the cool night air. Emily's training kicked in as she assessed his injuries, a gash on his forehead, a dislocated shoulder, and likely internal bruising. His expensive suit and the sleek design of the car hinted at wealth, but at that moment, he was just another person who needed her help. "Stay with me," she murmured, her hands moving swiftly to check his pulse and stabilize his head. She dialed 911, her voice steady, despite the urgency. While waiting for the ambulance, she worked quickly, tearing a strip from her rain-drenched jacket to press against the man's bleeding wound. The man stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. His gaze met hers, and he whispered something barely audible. "What is it?" she asked, leaning closer. He managed, before slipping back into unconsciousness. Emily stayed by his side until the wailing sirens of the ambulance broke through the storm. The paramedics arrived and took over, carefully extricating the man from the wreckage. One of them recognized her from the hospital. "You're a lifesaver, Emily. He wouldn't have made it without you," he said as they loaded the man into the ambulance. As they drove off into the night, Emily returned to her car, drenched and shivering, her mind still replaying the scene. She didn't even know his name. To her, he was just another soul she had helped, like so many others before him. Yet, something about the encounter lingered, a strange sense that this moment was far from over. Unbeknownst to Emily, the man she had saved was not just anyone. He was Nathan Blake, a tech mogul and heir to a fortune that spanned generations. And by saving his life, she had unknowingly stepped into a story that would change hers forever. The next morning, Emily woke to the shrill beeping of her alarm clock, dragging her from restless sleep. The events of the previous night felt like a fever dream, an accident, the rain, the unconscious man. She shook her head as she stretched, wincing at the soreness in her arms from bracing against the storm. Her modest studio apartment was dimly lit by the pale morning light filtering through the thin curtains, and the smell of coffee brewing in her tiny kitchen reminded her of the long day ahead. As she sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed on the table. Curious, she glanced at the notification, a breaking news alert. The headline immediately caught her attention. Her heart skipped a beat as she clicked the article. There it was, a picture of the man she had pulled from the wreckage. Nathan Blake, heir to the Blake Industries fortune and renowned entrepreneur, was recovering in a private hospital after a harrowing accident. The article praised the actions of a good Samaritan who had saved his life before the paramedics arrived. Emily's face flushed. It was surreal to see her actions from the night before turned into a headline, but no one knew it was her. That was fine, she wasn't one for attention. Still, she couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and pride that Nathan had survived. After finishing her coffee, Emily grabbed her bag and her scrubs, preparing for another shift at the hospital. As she slung her jacket over her arm, something fluttered to the floor. She frowned, bending to pick up a small piece of folded paper she didn't recognize. Emily stared at the note, her mind racing. She hadn't noticed it the night before. How had it ended up in her pocket? Had Nathan slipped it to her while she was tending to him? She had been too focused on stabilizing him to notice anything else. Her thoughts were interrupted by another buzz from her phone. This time, it was a message from the hospital staff group chat, discussing the arrival of a high-profile patient, Nathan Blake himself. Her stomach twisted. Curiosity got the better of her. After her shift started, Emily found herself making her way to the private wing of the hospital, where VIP patients were treated. The air was noticeably quieter, the usual chaos replaced by an almost reverent calm. She spotted him in one of the rooms, through the glass partition. Nathan was sitting up in bed, his arm in a sling and a bandage over his forehead, but he looked alert. A nurse was checking his vitals. Before she could second-guess herself, Emily walked up to the doorway. Nathan's eyes met hers, and a flicker of recognition lit his expression. "You," he said, his voice hoarse, but steady. "You're the one who saved me." Emily hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I just did what anyone would have done." Nathan shook his head. "No. You did much more than that." What Emily didn't realize was that this simple act of checking in would unravel a connection she couldn't yet comprehend, a connection that would take her far beyond her modest life. The next day, Emily was back at the hospital, moving through her shift as usual. Yet, her thoughts kept drifting to Nathan Blake, the man whose life she had saved. She couldn't shake the memory of his gratitude, or the peculiar feeling that their paths weren't meant to cross again. She assumed that was the end of it, another patient she'd helped and left behind in her growing list of faces and names. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. During her lunch break, a fellow nurse approached her. "Emily, someone's here to see you," she said, her tone tinged with curiosity. Emily frowned. "Who?" The nurse shrugged. "No idea, but he's definitely not one of our regulars." Curious and slightly wary, Emily made her way to the waiting area, where a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit stood out among the bustling crowd. His confident posture and air of wealth immediately gave him away. "Miss Carson?" he asked, his voice smooth but formal. "Yes," Emily replied cautiously. He extended a business card. "My name is Anthony Moore. I'm Mr. Nathan Blake's personal assistant. Mr. Blake asked me to deliver this to you." Emily took the card, flipping it over to find an invitation embossed in gold script. It was an invitation to dinner at the Blake estate, a formal gathering to thank her personally for her actions the night of the accident. Emily blinked in disbelief. "Dinner? At his estate?" "Yes," Anthony said, a polite smile on his face. "Mr. Blake wishes to express his gratitude properly. He insisted that you come." Her first instinct was to decline. The thought of stepping into a world so vastly different from her own, a world of wealth and power, felt daunting. She could already picture herself out of place in her best outfit, surrounded by strangers who had probably never worked a day in their lives. "Thank you, but I don't think." "Miss Carson," Anthony interrupted gently, "Nathan specifically asked me to convey that this is important to him. He feels he owes you his life. He would very much appreciate your presence." Emily hesitated. The earnestness in Anthony's voice, combined with her curiosity about Nathan, made it difficult to say no. She glanced at the invitation again, its elegance a stark contrast to her simple lifestyle. "When is it?" she finally asked. "Tomorrow evening. I can arrange for a car to pick you up if needed." Emily nodded reluctantly. "I'll think about it." As Anthony left, she stood there clutching the card, unsure whether she'd made the right decision by not immediately refusing. The next evening, Emily found herself stepping out of a car at the gates of the Blake estate. The grandiose mansion loomed before her, its lights casting a warm glow against the dark sky. As she approached the entrance, she took a deep breath, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. Little did she know, walking through those doors would lead her not only to answers, but also to a truth that would change her life forever. The towering gates of the Blake estate swung open with a soft hum as Emily's car approached, revealing a sprawling property that seemed to stretch endlessly under the soft glow of evening lights. The mansion itself was an architectural marvel, an elegant blend of modern design and classic opulence, with marble pillars, expansive glass windows, and intricately manicured gardens. Emily clutched her simple clutch bag tighter, the anxiety bubbling in her chest making her feel even more out of place. She had reluctantly agreed to Nathan Blake's invitation, largely out of curiosity. Why would a man of his stature go to such lengths to thank her? She was a nurse, accustomed to saving lives and walking away without fanfare. This grand dinner felt excessive, even unnecessary. As she stepped out of the car, a uniformed valet greeted her with a polite nod and took her keys. Emily glanced down at her modest cocktail dress, a simple navy blue number she'd bought for a friend's wedding years ago. It felt inadequate as she walked up the grand steps, each one amplifying the sense of unease growing within her. The heavy doors opened, and Emily was greeted by the warm, elegant interior of the mansion. A massive chandelier hung overhead, casting shimmering light across the marble floors and gilded walls. Soft classical music floated through the air. A butler approached, bowing slightly. "Miss Carson, welcome. Mr. Blake is expecting you," he said, his voice formal but kind. Emily nodded and followed him through the expansive hallways, past rooms that seemed too perfect to be lived in. Finally, they arrived at a large dining room where several people were already gathered. The table, long enough to seat 20, was adorned with crystal glasses, fine china, and an array of floral arrangements that looked more like works of art. Nathan Blake was the first to rise from his chair as she entered. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his arm still in a sling from the accident, but his expression was warm and genuine. "Emily," he said, his smile breaking the tension she felt. "Thank you for coming." She returned his smile, her nerves easing slightly as he approached. "Thank you for inviting me. This is quite something," she said, gesturing to the lavish surroundings. Nathan chuckled. "My family can be a bit over the top, but I wanted to thank you properly." He introduced her to his family, his mother, Eleanor, a graceful woman with a warm demeanor, his father, Charles, a stern-looking man with piercing eyes, and his sister, Victoria, who offered Emily a tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As the dinner began, Emily found herself seated near Eleanor, who engaged her in pleasant conversation about her work as a nurse. Nathan occasionally chimed in, steering the conversation away from awkward silences or probing questions from his father. Despite her initial discomfort, Emily found herself enjoying the meal, the rich flavors of the gourmet dishes a far cry from her usual fare. But her momentary ease shattered when her eyes drifted to the fireplace at the far end of the room. Above the mantel hung a large family portrait, meticulously painted, capturing the Blakes in all their glory. Eleanor and Charles stood at the center, with Nathan and Victoria beside them. But it wasn't the polished smiles or the luxurious setting of the painting that caught Emily's attention, it was a small detail in the background. A young girl. Standing beside Eleanor in the portrait, partially obscured by a plant, was a little girl with dark hair and wide eyes. Emily's breath hitched. That girl was her. The realization sent a wave of confusion crashing over her. She blinked, her mind scrambling to rationalize what she was seeing. How could her face be in their family portrait? "Emily, are you all right?" Eleanor's voice broke through her thoughts, drawing the attention of everyone at the table. Emily forced a smile, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up her glass of water. "Yes, I'm fine. Just admiring the painting," she said, hoping to steer attention away from herself. Nathan followed her gaze to the portrait, his brows furrowing slightly. "That was painted years ago. A family keepsake," he said, glancing back at her. "Do you recognize it?" Emily hesitated, debating whether to confront what she had seen. But the knot in her stomach demanded answers. The little girl in the background, who is she? The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Eleanor's smile faltered, and Charles exchanged a sharp glance with her. Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by Emily's question. That's, Eleanor began, but her voice trailed off. That's no one of importance, Charles interjected brusquely, his tone final. A mistake by the artist, nothing more. But Emily could see the tension in Eleanor's face, the way her hands fidgeted with the napkin in her lap. She wasn't convinced. Nathan, sensing the awkwardness, tried to lighten the mood. Our family portraits always seem to have some odd details. Must be a curse of tradition, he joked, though his eyes lingered on Emily with curiosity. As the dinner continued, Emily found it increasingly difficult to focus on the conversations around her. Her mind was consumed by the image of the portrait and the questions it raised. She couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a coincidence. When the evening finally came to an end, Nathan walked her to the door. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice low. I hope tonight wasn't too overwhelming. It was enlightening, Emily replied, her words carefully chosen. Thank you again for the invitation. As she stepped into the waiting car, her thoughts raced. That painting, the girl, the Blake family, there was a connection there, one that her instincts told her she needed to uncover. And deep down, she knew her life would never be the same. Emily couldn't shake the image of the little girl in the portrait. The resemblance to her younger self was uncanny, and the Blake family's awkward reaction only fueled her suspicion. Something was being hidden, and she couldn't rest until she understood what it was. The next morning, Emily decided to act. After her hospital shift, she went home and retrieved a small box of keepsakes her mother had left behind when she passed away years ago. Her mother, Sarah Carson, had always been private about her past. Emily had asked questions as a child, about her father, their life before they moved to the small town, but Sarah had deflected with vague answers or gentle laughter. As she sifted through old photographs and letters, Emily's heart raced. Finally, she found what she hadn't even realized she was looking for, a photo of her mother, much younger, standing in front of a grand estate. It wasn't hard to recognize the distinctive architecture. It was the Blake mansion. Emily's pulse quickened as she flipped the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, was a short note, with Eleanor, 1995. Eleanor. The name struck like a bell in Emily's mind. Nathan's mother. The woman who had sat next to her at dinner, who had been warm and kind yet hesitant when Emily asked about the portrait. The discovery left Emily torn. She felt like she had stumbled upon a puzzle piece that confirmed her connection to the Blakes, but she had no context to understand why or how. Her mind swirled with possibilities. Had her mother worked for the family? Was there more to the story than she knew? The next day, Emily returned to the Blake estate, this time uninvited. She didn't know what she hoped to achieve, maybe an honest conversation, maybe closure, but she knew she couldn't rest until she confronted Eleanor. The butler greeted her at the door, surprised to see her, but polite nonetheless. Miss Carson, I wasn't aware you were expected. I wasn't, Emily admitted, feeling a pang of guilt for showing up unannounced. But I need to speak with Mrs. Blake. It's important. The butler hesitated before nodding. Please wait here. Minutes later, Eleanor appeared, her expression calm but curious. She ushered Emily into a private sitting room, where they could speak without interruption. Emily, Eleanor began, sitting gracefully on a plush armchair. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Is everything all right? Emily hesitated, the words catching in her throat. Finally, she placed the photograph on the coffee table between them. Eleanor's eyes widened as she picked it up, her hand trembling slightly. I found this in my mother's belongings, Emily said softly. That's her in the photo, isn't it? And that's your house? Eleanor's composure cracked, and she let out a heavy sigh. Yes, she admitted. That's your mother, Sarah. She used to work for our family many years ago. What did she do? Emily pressed, her voice trembling. She was our nanny, Eleanor said, her tone tinged with emotion. She cared for Nathan and Victoria when they were children. She was more than just an employee, she was a friend. I trusted her with my children, with my home. She was like family. Emily's chest tightened. Her mother had never mentioned working as a nanny for a wealthy family. If she was so close to you, why did she leave? Eleanor's gaze dropped, and for a moment, she looked lost in the past. It wasn't her choice, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean? Eleanor sighed again, folding her hands in her lap. My husband, Charles, didn't approve. He believed Sarah was becoming too involved in our lives, too close. He thought it was improper for an employee to have such a personal connection with the family. There was a disagreement. Charles insisted she leave, and I didn't fight him as hard as I should have. I've regretted it ever since. Emily felt a surge of anger and sadness. Her mother had been cast out of the Blakes' lives because of a misplaced sense of propriety. Did she ever contact you after that? No, Eleanor said, shaking her head. But not a day goes by that I don't think of her. She was a remarkable woman, Emily. She would have been so proud of the person you'd become. The words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened Emily's sense of loss. Her mother's connection to the Blakes was a chapter of her life that had been erased, leaving Emily to piece it together years later. Before Emily could respond, the door opened, and Nathan entered, his brows furrowed in confusion. Emily? What's going on? Eleanor rose, placing a gentle hand on her son's arm. Nathan, we need to talk. There's something you should know about Emily, and about her mother. As Eleanor began to explain, Emily's emotions churned. She had come seeking answers, and now she was on the brink of uncovering the full truth, a truth that would forever change how she saw herself, her mother, and the Blake family. The next morning, Emily couldn't get the portrait or Eleanor's hesitant response out of her mind. The girl in the painting was undoubtedly her younger self, there was no denying it. But how could that be? She needed answers, and there was only one place to start, her late mother's belongings. At home, Emily pulled out the old wooden box her mother had left behind, tucked away in the corner of her closet. It was filled with faded photographs, letters, and small keepsakes. Her mother, Sarah Carson, had always been a private person, sharing little about her past. Whenever Emily had asked questions about their life before moving to the small town, Sarah would brush them off with vague answers or a gentle smile. Emily sifted through the photos, searching for anything that might connect her mother to the Blake family. After minutes of careful sorting, she found it, a worn photograph of Sarah standing in front of a grand estate. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The building in the picture was unmistakable, it was the Blake mansion. On the back of the photograph, written in her mother's neat handwriting, were the words, "With Eleanor, 1995. Eleanor. The name leapt out at her. It was Nathan's mother, the same woman who had welcomed her warmly during dinner, but faltered when Emily asked about the girl in the portrait. The discovery sent Emily's mind spinning. Why had her mother been at the Blake estate? And why had she never mentioned it? Was she a guest? An employee? The unanswered questions only deepened her curiosity and unease. The next day, Emily decided to take a bold step. After her hospital shift, she drove to the Blake estate uninvited. She wasn't sure what she hoped to achieve, but the photograph in her pocket felt like the key to a mystery she couldn't ignore. At the front door, the butler looked surprised to see her, but allowed her inside after she explained she needed to speak with Eleanor. Eleanor appeared moments later, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Emily, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Is everything all right? Instead of answering, Emily pulled the photograph from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. Eleanor's face paled as she picked it up, her hands trembling slightly. Where did you get this? Eleanor asked softly, her voice tinged with emotion. It was my mother's, Emily said. She never told me she worked for your family. But that's her, isn't it? And that's your house? Eleanor nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the photograph. Yes. That's Sarah. She worked for us years ago as a nanny. She was more than an employee, she was a dear friend. Emily's heart raced. Then why did she leave? Why did she never mention any of this to me? Eleanor hesitated, her face shadowed with regret. There's more to the story, Emily. Things I should have told you during dinner. But perhaps it's time you heard the truth. Emily braced herself. The answers she had been seeking were within reach, but they threatened to upend everything she thought she knew about her mother, and about herself. Emily sat in the Blake family sitting room, her heart heavy with the revelations Eleanor had shared. Her mother, Sarah, had once been a beloved nanny for the family, practically a member of their household. But Charles Blake's insistence on keeping personal boundaries had forced Sarah to leave. Eleanor admitted she had deeply regretted not standing up to her husband. I've always felt I failed her, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. And now, seeing you here, it's as if she sent you back to us. Nathan, who had remained silent during much of the conversation, placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. You're part of this family, whether you knew it or not, he said sincerely. And I want you to know that you're welcome here. Emily's emotions churned, gratitude, sadness, and anger all at once. She was glad to learn about her mother's past, but the loss of so much time weighed heavily on her. Yet, Eleanor's openness and Nathan's support gave her a sense of belonging she hadn't anticipated. As the days passed, Emily began to visit the Blakes more often, learning about her mother's life during her time with the family. Eleanor shared stories, photos, and memories that helped Emily piece together the missing parts of Sarah's history. Though Charles remained distant, Emily found solace in her growing bond with Eleanor and Nathan. The rift that had separated their families for decades began to heal. In the quiet moments, Emily often felt her mother's presence, as if Sarah were guiding her toward this newfound connection. It wasn't the reunion she'd expected, but it was a beginning, a chance to honor her mother's memory and forge a future she never imagined. The Blake estate was quiet under the morning sun as Emily stood in the garden, gazing out at the vibrant flowers that surrounded the fountain. The air was filled with the scent of fresh blooms, and the tranquility was almost surreal compared to the whirlwind of emotions she had experienced over the past few weeks. Her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. From a chance encounter on a stormy night to uncovering her mother's connection to the Blakes, Emily now felt like she had stepped into a chapter of her life she never knew existed. Eleanor had kept her promise to mend the past. The two spent hours together, sharing memories of Sarah, laughing and crying as they filled in the gaps left by years of silence. For Emily, it was like discovering a piece of her mother she had never fully known, a woman whose kindness and warmth had left a lasting impression on the Blake family. Nathan, too, had become a constant presence in her life. His gratitude for saving him had deepened into a genuine friendship, and there were moments, like now, as he walked into the garden to join her, that hinted at something more. You look lost in thought, Nathan said, his voice warm. Emily turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. Just thinking about how strange life can be. I never expected any of this. Nathan nodded, his gaze steady. Sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, even if it's not what we expect. As they stood together in the garden, Emily felt a sense of peace. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace it.